Right, so today we mark 2 years since Israel began its genocide of Gaza. Gaza, to all intents and purposes, is basically gone now, isn't it? Its people scramble to survive amongst ruin with nowhere to go. Trapped in the largest open air prison on earth, and the world still has the gall to act surprised. The death toll now reads like a population census. More buildings have been decimated than still stand, from hospitals to homes, and the governments who funded it still call themselves civilised. Britain and Italy have chosen to mark the anniversary not with reflection but with bans and arrests, the surest sign that they know exactly what they've enabled. Giorgia Meloni mocks protesters. Keir Starmer calls them un-British when he has invited Israeli officials to meet with him and shake his hand, from ministers to the President of Israel himself, whilst leaving British flotilla participants to Israel's mercy, saying they're a matter for Israel. The British citizens who tried to deliver food to starving children are in handcuffs or cells. If there's anything un-British about this moment, it isn't the people marching for Gaza or sailing to it. It's the leaders criminalising morality to try and keep their own consciences clean. So on this Gaza anniversary, let's tell them exactly what we think of them. Right, so 2 years have passed since the 7th of October 2023, and Gaza is, well, what can you say? The enclave has been bombed into near oblivion. Figures verified by the World Health Organization just last month record at least 63,746 Palestinians killed and 161,245 injured. Other reports state that the real toll is closer to 76,000 dead, with thousands of families wiped out completely. More than 200,000 tons of munitions have been dropped, 15 Hiroshima's worth of explosives in an area smaller than Greater London. The United Nations and the World Bank describe the results as uninhabitable. 78% of Gaza's buildings are damaged or destroyed. 9 in 10 Gazans, 1.9 million people, have been displaced, many multiple times. UNICEF counts over 50,000 children killed or maimed. The cost of reconstruction is estimated at $53 billion. Behind every statistic lies the same political fact, though. The governments that could have stopped this have chosen not to. This is not tragic crossfire, it's the deliberate demolition of a society while its supposed protectors debate wording at the UN. When loss becomes this vast, numbers risk becoming abstract and dehumanised, so we mustn't let that happen. Yet the arithmetic still matters because it exposes political will. WHO's 63,000 confirmed dead are already more than all Israel's previous wars combined. The Lancet projects that indirect deaths from hunger, disease, lack of medical care, not to mention all of those missing presumed dead, could push the true death toll above 10% of the entire population. That estimate is grounded in modelling by the likes of Johns Hopkins University. Their status quo scenario predicted 66,000 additional preventable deaths even without escalation. Governments received those forecasts and continued approving weapons exports. Every body in whose ledgers corresponds to a signature on an export licence or a trade waiver issued in London or Washington or Brussels or wherever else. The Western moral vocabulary of self-defence and proportionality and restraint needed on both sides has become a euphemism for deliberate paralysis. Knowing became complicity. But when states refused to act, civilians did, didn't they? The Sumud flotilla was a humanitarian convoy of 50 boats carrying food, medicine and baby formula to Gaza. Nearly 500 volunteers from 47 countries joined, aid workers, clergy, journalists, doctors, operating legally in international waters. Israel's navy intercepted them anyway. Lesser navy, more a pirate flotilla, if you like. Commandos boarded at gunpoint and seized everyone on board. The intent was not confusion, but deterrence, to make humanitarianism itself a punishable act. Among the detainees were, of course, Greta Thunberg, but there were plenty of others too, notably people in the media that we're speaking about right now, such as Yvonne Ridley or Surya McEwen and Lorenzo D'Agostino, have all featured in recent coverage. Testimonies describe hooding, beatings and sleep deprivation. The Swedish Foreign Ministry confirmed Thunberg's harsh treatment. McEwen's colleagues called her capture kidnapping, which it was, by a pirate navy. It took place in international waters, and D'Agostino described forced confessions. On the treatment of Greta Thunberg, the Turkish journalist Ersin Çelik said they did exactly what the Nazis did. They publicly humiliated her and targeted her specifically because she's a well-known figure. More than 100 volunteers remain unaccounted for, including the Scottish Yvonne Ridley. Reports of some still incarcerated beginning hunger strikes have now come out as well. They can starve our bodies, one has apparently said, but they cannot starve our purpose. Photographs of ordinary citizens in Israeli handcuffs tell the story better than any statement ever could. They show how far Israel's impunity now extends. and how silent its allies have become. The UN has acknowledged multiple complaints about torture and disappearance, but confined itself to procedural concern, yet more hand-wringing. The EU asked for clarity. None of the governments whose citizens were seized, from Britain to Sweden, Italy, Australia, all the rest, demanded accountability. London's response was the most revealing, though. Despite British citizens kidnapped in international waters in violation of international maritime law, when asked about the abductions, Downing Street said it was a matter for Israel. That phrase captures the collapse of British sovereignty itself. It doesn't actually exist. A British government surrendering jurisdiction over its own nationals to a state accused of torturing them. The immunity granted to Israel abroad is now being reproduced at home, in the policing of protesters we've seen again this past weekend, and the criminalisation of conscience. What began as diplomatic cover has metastasised into domestic repression. In Italy, the confrontation is on the surface. Following the flotilla attack, millions joined strikes and demonstrations. Dock workers have refused to handle any further Israeli shipments. Ahead of those recent protests, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni mocked them, saying, "A long weekend and revolution don't go together." 4 days later, pro-Palestine rallies are getting banned, citing security risks. She's not laughing now. Repression is always the reflex of a government that senses legitimacy slipping. Italy's not an exception, it's a symptom. Across Europe, states are restricting protest precisely because public empathy has become unmanageable for them. If Meloni fears disorder, though, Keir Starmer fears honesty. Perhaps no surprise given how serially dishonest he is over all manner of things, but on this issue, more than usual. Yesterday, he branded planned Gaza anniversary marches as un-British. He's turned our moral opposition to what Israel has been doing for 2 years now into an accusation of cultural treason. Protest is not un-British. It's pretty much the most British thing you can do. It's the foundation of every right we as Britons possess, from suffrage to unionism to anti-war movements. Calling dissent un-British is historical amnesia weaponised by a man who frankly is as amoral as you can get. But he's gone even further than that, more depraved than that. British flotilla volunteer Sarah Wilkinson was arrested at Heathrow under counter-terrorism powers after her release from Israeli detention, having taken part in that flotilla. The kidnapped victim now treated as a criminal. Yvonne Ridley remains imprisoned in Israel, but Starmer has already said that's a matter for Israel, so what help can she expect? Or would consular assistance for her be un-British now too? Meanwhile, Israeli officials directly involved in the bombardment, the likes of foreign ministers like Gideon Saar or Air Force Commander Tomer Bar or President of Israel himself, it's Isaac Herzog, have all been received in London getting the red carpet treatment. A British citizen can be tortured abroad for delivering aid, yet the architects of that torture are welcomed with handshakes on the steps of Downing Street. If Starmer wants to talk about what's un-British, then he doesn't get more un-British than this photograph right here. Each generation faces a moral test, and we should remember that as we mark this tragic anniversary. This is ours, and our leadership has failed as far as it is possible to. When a Labour Prime Minister calls humanitarian protest un-British, he's not defending national values, he's tearing them apart. The suffragettes, the miners' strikes, the anti-apartheid campaigners were all branded threats to order. Their successors marched for Gaza. The rhetoric has not changed, only the target has. Starmer's words expose a deeper fear, though, that empathy might still exist in a population his party cannot control, no matter how increasingly authoritarian they become. To admit Britain's role in the genocide would mean confronting the arms exports, the intelligence sharing, the veto diplomacy, his own role in all of it too. Easier to redefine patriotism as obedience and shove another flag up his arse. The collapse is legal as well as moral, made worse by Starmer's legal background, because we know he knows all of this. The International Court of Justice has ruled Israel's actions plausibly genocidal. The International Criminal Court has opened files. The UN has ruled Israel's actions to be genocide. Yet enforcement stalls because the governments funding Israel control the institutions judging it. The post-war legal order functions now to punish adversaries and protect allies. The United States and United Kingdom invoke international law against others while vetoing it for themselves. And the consequence is visible because you only need to look at the state of the Gaza Strip. Starvation as strategy, collective punishment as policy, immunity as entitlement. Every press statement about Gaza is written to avoid recognition, despite having symbolically recognised it, meaning nothing as it does in practice without being backed up with action. Tragic, complex, unfortunate. The vocabulary drains the accountability from the atrocity. Israel has the right to defend itself is repeated as mantra, even when the victims are aid convoys and hospitals and people trying to deliver baby formula. Mainstream outlets then dutifully reproduce this framing, don't they? Not holding power to account, but enabling the awfulness. Deaths appear in the passive voice. People died, not Israel killed them. Israeli claims are quoted verbatim. Palestinian evidence is always caveated. It's not journalism, but narrative management designed to maintain the illusion that Western policy is unquestioningly correct, rather than guilty as sin and utterly complicit. Meloni and Starmer supposedly differ ideologically, but in practice not that much, since they share the same reflex. Suppress empathy before it becomes resistance. Meloni bans marches, Starmer arrests protesters. Both claim to protect order while dismantling the moral foundations of democracy. Across Europe, anti-protest legislation is multiplying. Britain's Public Order Act allows police to prohibit demonstrations deemed disruptive, and they've proven keener to arrest grannies and disabled people holding cardboard placards than going after actual criminals. France criminalises public solidarity with Palestine. Germany equates the kafir with extremism. The purpose is not stability, but deterrence. Discipline by exhaustion by governments who have thrown their lot in with Israel versus publics who overwhelmingly support Palestine. Governments call this safeguarding the public. In truth, they're safeguarding themselves from the public. But it's unsustainable, and it can't work, and it can't last. The more you attempt to crack down on dissent, the more people end up dissenting. Protests are swelling, alliances are straining, and each new atrocity strips another layer from the myth of having a humanitarian leadership. Every suppressed demonstration, every arrested volunteer, every hunger strike exposes a widening gap between rulers and ruled. The statistics themselves form the indictment. 76,000 dead, 63,000 verified, 50,000 children, 78% of infrastructure destroyed, $53 billion in damages. Each number is a gravestone and a receipt. The hypocrisy is measurable as well. Arms exports to Israel continue to rise. American weapons constitute most of the munitions dropped on Gaza, but UK shipments have risen as well. The European Union's dual-use exports persist despite public outrage. Indifference is a learned behaviour. Decades of media framing have normalised Palestinian suffering as background noise. Fear of accusations of anti-Semitism chills debate. Politicians exploit that fear to equate criticism of Israel with prejudice itself. And the result is moral paralysis dressed up as complexity. Viewers who would never justify atrocities elsewhere call Gaza a complicated situation, but it's not complicated. The questions are very simple. Is starvation acceptable policy? Is bombing hospitals legal? Is torturing volunteers defensible? The answer to each is quite obviously no, isn't it? So claims of complexity only serve those who benefit from confusing and muddying the waters, Israel and those serving their interests. Moral leadership has migrated. It no longer resides in Western capitals, but in the hands of those acting where governments will not. It lives in the likes of Yemen's blockade of Israeli shipping, in Italy striking dock workers, in the British crowds defying protest bans, and in the Ashdod hunger strikers refusing to eat while Gaza starves. The enforcement of international law now comes from the bottom up, not the top down. Diplomats might draft communiques, citizens are the ones enforcing ethics. So Britain is at a crossroads again, I guess. The question is whether it will defend conscience or criminalise it. Starmer's un-British remark should be a wake-up call to every single one of us. Either protest remains a legitimate expression of principle, as it has always been, or the country abandons the democratic tradition that wants to find it, and we're just going to slide further into the mire and miasma. The test is embodied in individual cases, from Yvonne Ridley, who is still detained in Israel, being subjected to goodness knows what. Sarah Wilkinson, arrested as soon as she landed back in Britain. Thousands marching under surveillance. Their treatment reveals what Britain's become, a state more willing to appease a foreign power than protect its own citizens. That's not patriotism. That's not sovereignty. That's selling out. If this continues, the word ally will mean client, and British values will mean silence whilst becoming increasingly complicit. The flotilla volunteers, the protesters on the streets, are not fringe radicals. They're the moral remainder of a political system that's been utterly hollowed out by hypocrisy. They've done what governments refuse to do, act according to law and to conscience. Their defiance has consequences. It demonstrates that the moral contract between citizens and state still exists, even if the state has broken it. History will remember them as the people who refused to let genocide be normalised. In them lies the reversal Starmer fears the most. Those he calls un-British are the only Britons still behaving like citizens living in a democracy. And 2 years on, Gaza lies in ruins, and with it the moral architecture of the West. The governments that claim to defend civilisation have sanctioned its destruction. They have turned international law into privilege and conscience into crime. And the only people who have acted honourably are the only ones being punished for it. The volunteers and the journalists and the hunger strikers and the marchers. They are Britain now. They are the best of British. They are Europe's conscience. They are what remains of the idea that humanity still matters. The facade is falling, though. Protests are growing louder, alliances are fraying, and the language of denial no longer conceals the crime it was built to hide. In the end, it was not the protesters who betrayed Britain, it was the leaders who feared them. Because nothing is more un-British or more unhuman than silence in the face of genocide. So on this 2-year anniversary, let's remember who has allowed this situation to reach 2 years and condemn them for it. Of course, it isn't just Starmer's devotion to Israel above the interests of British citizens that damns him, but his weaponisation of racism alongside it, as his response to the Manchester synagogue attack has made abundantly clear, whilst his ignoring of a similar attack on a mosque in Peacehaven shows that hierarchy of racism in his Labour Party is still very much alive and kicking despite the Ford report. Check out the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.